Hello everyone, greetings from the 7th of Nero, AJ here, commencing, perhaps, yet another series. One thing I wanted to do to more or less coincide with the release of IKRPG Requiem was a sort of a gazetteer for numerous locations throughout Immorese, which would be suitable as kick-off points or major adventuring areas for RPG campaigns. Most places featured on the maps of Immorese have little relevance to the overall plot of the main War Machine and Horde's storyline, while most, if not all, of the short stories, novellas and novels set in Immorese are largely focused on localized areas. The Hengehold Scrolls is perhaps one of the few items of fluff which spans a large swathe of the continent all in one go. In general, though, aside from capitals and cities such as Corvus, Ancient Icthia and Cardiff, most names on maps, especially old ruins, are blank slates but for a handful of factoids of in-world history, banal features, or a character's past, but nothing which tells the reader anything genuinely material about the place in question. Despite this, what's mentioned in the IKRPG source material for many of them make them fertile ground for narrative gameplay and lend a certain lived-in quality for these places which the War Machine and Horde story doesn't quite achieve. As what follows comes primarily from one source, it's deliberately not exhaustive and for once actually shorter than usual, unlike when I normally say that. It is to my eternal regret that I ever set foot in Ternon Crag again. It was bad enough the first time I visited that lawless place, but things have changed there, and while it is better in some respects, it is, in aggregate, a worse place than it once was, much like the Iron Kingdoms as a whole, if no less violent than it used to be. The Crag, as it is often called, is a moderately sized town of some 6,000 or 7,000 people, of nearly every race which is to be found in western Immorese, though dominated by humans of Midland extraction. Though one need not venture far to see a Trollkin, Gobber, Ogren, or even the occasional relic dwarf. Many of its people are not permanent residents, though, often coming and going as merchants or adventurers looking or carrying out new bounties and contracts. The town is situated on the eastern bank of the Combs Beacon, the easterly of the two tributaries that eventually combine to form the Black River. At the base of the eastern slopes of the Grey Branch mountain range that runs from Mount Shyleth Breen, the southernmost landmark of Ios, and Caerleys Crag, Ternon Crag was, for a short while, naturally protected from Scorn incursions from the Bloodstone Marches and the military district the invaders poetically call Tor Vaktash. Not that there would be much for the Scorn to profit from by taking control of the town, since it was, and still is, of limited military value and awkward to both occupy and defend for any invading force, and given the local residents, would require more effort than is likely worth to keep it under control. Even so, it was easiest to attack for a riverborne force approaching from the north after the establishment of the Scorn stronghold at Clockhall Fortress, close to the Castle of the Keys. And the Craggers are perhaps aptly named, with what the town experiences throughout the year. Dry winds, harsh whether hot or chill, blow through the Grey Branch Gap, down the Combs Beacon, and through the town. Flooding in autumn is not unheard of, as are sandstorms which blow through the narrow mountain passes in spring. Even so, the townsfolk adapted to life in this environment and even use it to their advantage where they can. In terms of local transportation, those with basic boats or ferries can travel downstream to Fort Fulk, whereupon something sturdier must be used to make the journey any further south, towards and through the March Fells past King's Vine, and at last reaching the mouth of the Black River at Caspia and Seoul. To the north of Ternon Crag is a heavily wooded and largely unexplored patch of wilderness with the Skullforth Lake upstream, and the Glimmerwood as the crow flies. And to the west is the Widow's Wood, which separates it from the nearest major city of Corvus. Thus it can be seen Ternon Crag is quite out of the way, so one must wonder why it became such a haven for some among the very worst of Western Immorese society. Despite its infamy and notoriety among those of a more mercenary nature, the Crag is not an especially old settlement. Being barely 50 years old, it wasn't meant to be an adventurer's rest stop as it were, but its founders were nonetheless adventurous. Originally established by entrepreneurs who would eventually form the Grey Branch Expeditionary Company, Ternon Crag, as a community, formed around the mining interests of speculators who wanted to make something more permanent of several years of trying to take advantage of the wealth of natural resources in the area. Its location along the Combs Beacon was ideally suited for river travel to and from the junction with the Black River, and, by association, the highway from Corvus to Caspia. Until this time, Ternon Crag was little more than a motley encampment of temporary structures, and its tents, shacks and huts made way for more lasting shops, promenades, houses and places of business. Though the town has fluctuated in population since its proper founding in 569 AR, it has steadily increased as mining has become the staple part of its economy, remaining strong through the depletion of some mineral seams and the discovery of new ones elsewhere in the vicinity. And ever at the fringe of civilization, the Dukes of the Western Midlands have left the Craggers to their own devices, and though it lies within that Signoran province, it is effectively an autonomous settlement. The laws of Signar are barely enforced here, and instead the local ways rule. However, the Crag's opportunistic origins very quickly almost became its downfall, when, barely more than 5 years old, the town burned down after a rowdy bar fight got a little more heated than everyone was accustomed to. In the aftermath, the permanent residents drew up the Charter, a list of unofficial laws to be upheld by the elected Marshal Chief, an office with the responsibilities of Sheriff and Mayor, more or less. While most Marshal Chiefs have done well in keeping the peace and earning the admiration of the permanent residents, the less savoury and less scrupulous drifters who come and go from the Crag when coin tempts their noses, they make the Marshal Chief's job a fair bit more difficult. Order is otherwise kept by the regular presence of armed mercenaries, who are often from the same company yet work for different clients, one of whom may be the Marshal Chief themselves. Despite the potential for fractiousness in this town, though, civil disorder is a constant, which has rarely ever escalated so far as to threaten its very existence. Instead, squabbles among the more lawless corners of the Craggers merely leads to fluctuations in the population, when aggrieved parties are either killed extrajudicially or simply depart in defeat, something which has been a near constant in the town's history. The first major boom to come to Ternon Crag was in 604 AR with the discovery of diamonds in mines to the north. Local officials wished to keep it secret from the Signoran government, as well as other ears, but precious stones are not the sort of secret that is kept, either well or badly. Rumours quickly spread of a so-called diamond rush in Ternon Crag, and within a few months the Craggers, who numbered barely 1,000, were inundated with the greedy and profiteering. By 606 AR, the population had boomed to over 5,000, but with this apparent prosperity came a more dangerous factor. Among some of the newcomers were Signoran traitors, those who remained sympathetic to the exiled Vinter IV, such as Asheth Magnus. His presence not only caused somewhat of a stir, but also the establishment of headquarters for some mercenary companies of ill repute, including Jarek Crow's crew, and even a chapter of the Steelheads. Despite this, the demands of a much larger population led to the opening of shops and stores of all varieties, popping up in any available and suitable space around the town. Such expansion meant Ternon Crag became an adventurous haven, and a ready place of rest and seeking out new opportunities. With the exhaustion of some ore veins over the decades, prospectors have ventured further and further from Ternon Crag proper, in all directions as they are able. However, this brought with it different problems of its own, and not just of logistical support. Many miners tried their hand to the north, close to the area around the Castle of the Keys, and it would take a while for the connection to be made between this location and the then mysterious Panna's Pox. So named because of the prevalence of panning for precious metal dust close to Skullforth Lake. Panna's Pox is a skin condition which causes spiny eruptions along one's limbs and a blue-grey hue to seep in. For those who do not know, it is inexplicable and a source of much superstition. For those who do, the dragon blight makes the region north of Ternon Crag yet another place best avoided on one's travels. Even with Pyromalphic's destruction, cases of Panna's Pox remain and continue, a fact of which I can only partially explain. These days, the town is split into roughly 3 districts. The north, which is the most populous. The south, which is not so populated, but has seen its numbers swell in recent years thanks to refugees from the Infernal Invasion. And the outskirts, which is sparsely populated with few permanent residents, but which instead serves as the offices and waypoints for the various mines and quarries in the area, whether closed or active. As is expected, most of the town's shops and services can be found in the North Crag, along with most of the Crag's residential areas. In South Crag, the simply named Creeltown is the centre of Chalkin society in the Crag, as one would expect, and while it is almost an independent village within the town, a long history of Chalkin presence in the Crag prevents any lasting resentment from brewing which may be worse than anything between groups of humans. Also in the south are numerous shanties belonging to groups of newcomers and no few bounty offices for those looking for some muscle for coin, or vice versa. Little since the Protectorate's Great Crusade has reduced business for adventurers in the Crag, not even the coming of the Grimkin and their wicked harvest, or even the Infernal Invasion and all the horrors they brought with them from the outer abyss. The Crag remained relatively untouched by the claiming, being a solitary town in a relative wilderness and too insignificant to be within the notice of infernalists. In the aftermath, however, the nations around it are not what they used to be, and while Sulmenite remnants of the Protectorate have avoided this particular backwater, Iosant and Scorn are not a particularly uncommon sight. The change that Ios underwent, barring its borders once again to any from the outside, even other elves, and the defeat of the Scorn in the west, has led to bands of both peoples adopting a way of life which is foreign to them. Surely, with their recent history, their presence in Ternon Crag at this time has not brought peace or stability the residents desire, made worse by rumours of what the claiming has done to the rest of the Iron Kingdoms. But then, even without the elves and Scorn giving the Craggers trouble, fortune hunters from the remains of many of Signar, Lael, and even far-off Cador's ruined villages and towns eventually find opportunity. While many will do so in other places, such as Five Fingers, Corvus, or one of the freeholds of Rule, no few will wind up making their way along the Combs Beacon towards the Crag, more than willing to give the Craggers further headaches.